It was an early morning in January, and there were 2 days left before marks were due, and I was tossing and turning in bed because I realized that not one of my students had achieved the grade I was about to submit for them in 2 days. And so down over the stairs I went at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I just started pumping away on my computer. I was looking to change the weightings, move things around, see if one thing could match another thing, and this proved to be an exercise in futility. But I did come to a humbling conclusion that I would have to change everything about my assessment practice. And that's how I decided on my research project. We all know the lingo. Assessment 4 as of some summative assessment, formative assessment, peer teacher, what goes into the number. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we want to know is what is going into the number, that grade at the high school level, and what does it really mean? Can we say that a 92% and a 94% are that much different? Or when you have a failing grade, is there a big difference between the student who makes 25% or 40%? The question of the validity of the mark became a really important question for me all of a sudden. So really what I needed to focus on was that space between what I seen in the students in my day-to-day observations and what I truly believed they were capable of, and then the mark, because there seemed to be a disconnect in those two. As I completed my literature review, a theme seemed to pop up, and that was that a grade should represent achievement only, and this could become valid only if it's done through a curriculum-embedded assessment platform. So I settled on looking at curriculum-embedded assessment as a big part of my practice. This led me to my framework. There's two assumptions in my framework. First of all, that all assessment that is done as formative is used to inform decisions, teaching and learning activities. And the only time that a summative grade is assigned is when it's at the exit point of a lesson. I started by creating some baseline assessments. I did a series of them over a few days in class. I measured against the outcomes. So every assessment had a set of outcomes that I pushed it against. And then I also had the students do some self-assessment against those outcomes. The result was that I had a great level of baseline results that I could use to inform all of my decisions. From my instruction and unit planning, I used those to create everything that I would do from that point forward. The other thing was that students used it to create their goals. And from there, I created some rules about assessment in my class. The first rule was outcomes only. This meant that students were provided with the outcomes at the beginning of every unit or task. At the same time, if they had any questions about the requirements of an assessment or an assignment that they were doing, I referred them to the outcomes in order for them to understand the requirements. The second rule pertains to the ability for students to get a grade. So they didn't get a grade unless they went through a performance continuum first. They had to practice various stages before being allowed to engage in summative evaluation or quote-unquote get a grade. They love grades, and this was a challenge for them. This also led to another rule where I said hard work or no grades. So students want grades. They're trained for them. It's their carrot on the end of the stick. And so I populated our database with a series of comment codes and refused to give them a grade until they met proficient status. So the truth is, students take time to learn things, and one of the things that started to crop up was my inability to adhere to a timeline, the unit plans, the semester plan, and I found myself overwhelmed by the amount of curriculum and content that I wasn't getting covered on time. So I had to implement a rule, students first. And this meant that there weren't any deadlines. Now, after all that hard work that my students put into their achievement, I wanted their grades to be reflective of their achievement only, so I removed anything that was a non-curriculum item from the grade. And that included no late marks, but also no bonus marks, and that was mutiny for the high achievers. But at the end of the day, I had some really great surprises, increases in attendance, tutorial attendance, assignments were coming in on time, and students were willing to finally take some risk in my class. When you're embarking on this, you have to have students' self-assessment guides and formative assessment continuums, because if you want them to actually be able to move from one stage to the next and understand what they're doing, they need to have those guides to assess themselves and for you to also assess them to see where they are on that scale. I found there was a significant amount of time used in class to teach students the outcomes so that they understood what they needed to learn and why they needed to learn it. To teach self-assessment, so having the ability to actually assess their own work is a skill in and of itself, and that took up a huge amount of time. And then also being able to provide the feedback to my students. I realized that learning how to do assessment or curriculum-embedded assessment couldn't be done in a vacuum. I had to actually look at the feedback requirements and look at student involvement in the process, and then also the understanding by design concepts. And I've never in all of this time thought of assessment in any other way except the endpoint after the lessons. Formative assessment was done on the fly and informally. When we use curriculum-embedded assessment, the way we approach instruction and strategy changes. And in fact, if we change the way we look at assessment, it changes everything.